everyone, this is a live episode of my podcast McCool and the Gang, and we're joined today with Steve Levine, who is a Grammy Award winning producer and composer. So there you go. Very exciting indeed.
Thank you.
How you doing? How's lockdown been? I've not seen you since, I don't think.
Well, it's been good and terrible. In the very, very beginning, it was obviously strange, but because this is my own studio, obviously I could come in and do the odd bit and piece. And I was in the middle, actually, of a sample library. So that was actually perfect timing because it meant that I could spend the enormous amount of time that it takes on fine editing the samples. So I spent most of the beginning of lockdown fine-tuning the sample library, which is now up at Native Instruments, and that's done really well. And then just before lockdown, I did an EP with the Hush Tones, and we just got it out just as lockdown happened. And then during lockdown, we did Zoom-style rehearsals and songwriting, which worked quite well. And not only did I do it with them, but some of the other people that I work with. It's interesting how everyone has had to get very technology savvy. It's been an exercise for all of us, you know.
Yeah, it's been crazy for me, you know, because I wanted to plug everything in and then figuring out how to do it on Instagram. Oh, it was just like, how do people do this? Did you stay productive then throughout?
Yes, very productive. And most of my various business meetings have all been conducted with Zoom. And I have to say, in some cases, I almost prefer it. So that some of those things I probably won't go back to doing the old way. I think that the new way is better. I think when it comes to a band, there's nothing better than all being in the same room at the same time. You can't beat that.
Yeah.
You can do the homework via Zoom, and that's turned out to actually be incredibly productive because each person working separately has focused on the bit that's their concern, and then we've kind of joined them all up. So I'd say that's pretty good. But in the recording studio, you need to have everyone together.
Yeah, it's for jamming as well, and like songwriting. I've done a few sessions online, and that's been really good. But for rehearsing and recording, you need everyone there.
You do. You know, at the moment, until technology improves even more so, being in the same room at the same time is the only way to go.
Yeah, for sure. Let's fingers crossed.
Yeah,
that it happens soon. So going back to the beginning, I guess. You've worked with the likes of the Beach Boys, Boy George, The Clash and Motorhead, and you also produced and presented the BBC Radio 2 show The Record Producers, which deconstructs iconic records and how they were created. So it's a bit of background on you. Is there anything you would like to add to that?
No, I'm very proud of my radio things, and in fact, if I move the camera around, you can see our radio awards there. Look at that at the top. Those. We got some awards for them. They were very well received, so I was very proud to do them. And for me as a producer, it was great because I was able to interview my heroes, and getting access to some of the tapes really showed the craft. And what was interesting was the craft during the 60s, the 70s and the 80s, and how the craft changed. And when you looked at some of the recordings and the different skill sets that people had, it was really quite incredible. It really was. You know, each generation gets used to the technology that they have at their disposal. And I think that if you compare, you know, a Beatles multitrack, as I was lucky to do, with something that was recorded 20 years later, there isn't much difference other than the number of tracks. The focus is exactly the same. All artists, once they got in the studio, all behave the same way. But it's interesting how technology at each juncture enhances the performance. So that's kind of what we tried to do in the show, and it was very well received. It's still ongoing, and onwards and upwards.
Yes, awesome. Could you tell us why you chose music as a career, and in particular the kind of sonic side of it and the production of records?
When I sort of had the choice of which school to go to, I went to a technical school, and that school kind of specialised in those days for the older generation. You used to do your sort of exams, and then you'd have a choice between a grammar school or whatever it was. And fortunately, I got good results. So I went to this Canterbury Technical High School for boys. But in those days, they separated physics, chemistry, biology, and also you could do a separate electronics course. And I was absolutely fascinated. And I was fascinated actually from an early age with regard to the way that records sounded, because whilst I didn't understand it when I was growing up, I really noticed the difference between, say, a reggae record, a Beatles record, and a Motown record. They all sounded really, really different. And that was the thing that fascinated me. So when I was at school, we were encouraged with electronics. And in those days, electronics were really in its kind of infancy. And so consequently, you're able to build things really, really easily. So in the school era, I was very much kind of charged with doing the sound for the school productions and the bands and all that kind of thing. And so I learnt very quickly about how the sound of the band, and bearing in mind this is the mid-70s, and so glam rock and all those, T-Rex, David Bowie, those are the records that were played on the radio. And you heard a live band in those days and they sounded absolutely nothing like the record.
Yeah.
Whereas at least today bands can sound close to the record. And so I thought, why is it so bad? Why does live sound so terrible? Obviously, once I then got the job in a studio, I realised the difference. And particularly given those 70s records, the drums, often had loads of dampening on them and lots of close mic work. And so I realised very quickly how you created particular sounds. And then it coincided with the punk generation, and they wanted to record very DIY, and so that's how I got to work with the Clash and the Jags and the Vibrators and all those kind of bands. And I learnt my craft as they learnt their craft, because we were all kind of 17 at that point, and so young and enthusiastic. And I think punk really did change the music industry, because it was a new way of recording, a very fresh way of recording. It was very exciting as well, and so you kind of get swept along with it. And then very soon I started getting clients who wanted to use me because I was getting a particular sound. People forget, but if you look at the timeline of punk, it's a really interesting period, particularly in England. You've got punk, you've got disco, and you've got the sort of electronic world of the Kraftwerks and Giorgio Moroder and those kind of acts. Look at records and look at the timeline and look at the dates of things. People forget,
it all coexisted,
Donna Summer
kind of
was
thing.
Yeah.
And
so you had So for me, you had three parallel worlds. You had the guitar bands, you had the synthesizer bands, and then you had disco, which was kind of in between. And so as a engineer working on those different genres was a fantastic education in terms of sound, because they're all really different. The difference between a Rickenbacker bass on a punk record versus a jazz bass playing on a disco record versus a programmed mini moo going whatever. It's great education. It really is. And of course, look at today, I'm surrounded by the same kind of stuff.
Gadgets.
Nothing changes. Nothing changes. It just gets a little bit easier, a little bit more cost effective, but the principles are exactly the same.
So considering that there was a lot going on kind of genre-wise around the time that you first kind of got into production and started producing bands, what kind of draws you to how you enjoy music or how you enjoy creating a record? Because some people enjoy music in obviously different ways. Like some people are interested in sounds and textures, and then other people like myself are very emotionally connected, like lyrics people and songs people. So how do you kind of respond to music? Is it more about creating the kind of backdrop to the song, or is it bringing the song out, or is it different every time?
It's different every time, but generally speaking, most bands and most artists have a vision as to how they want the record, and in most cases they're influenced by other things, and sometimes it can be a tiny detail on someone else's record, a snare drum or a bass sound or something, and that can be the inspiration for a whole range of songwriting. So it can sometimes be that. So as a producer, you've got to decipher what the hell that is. But sometimes you can be drawn by things that are not there. Like, for example, when I first met you and first heard you, your voice sounded better than anyone else if you remember back to that Yamaha competition, everyone had the same PA setup. So there was no difference. It was a completely level playing field. You sounded better by quite a margin. And that was the first thing I thought, wow, your voice sounds really, really good. But but at that point, I couldn't hear any lyrics. I couldn't hear any song construction, but it was the start of that. And then you start to think, oh, that's interesting. And then, as you well know, you're a pretty damn good guitarist. And that's unusual in the singer-songwriter or the female singer-songwriter world. So then you've got two things. You've got a great sounding voice and you've got tools of the trade. And, you know, look at the curve of your playing and sound. It developed as both pedals. Once you got that white guitar, suddenly the sound started to develop, and the songwriting develops along with it. So you're drawn by all those things. So that's an emotional connection with the sound of the voice, an emotional connection with the sound of the record, which I think, as you say, is definitely something that affects everybody. Even, if you go back to disco records, the beat of a disco record affects people in a certain way, just as a beautiful guitar sound that really is rich and deep, that affects people in a certain way. And then if you can tell a story, that's the key, and that's more true, I guess, in the indie section. Certainly in the disco world, telling a story is probably not quite the same thing, but a good lyric is really, really important. But it starts with a good song, but then it's got to be presented really well, and that's where a good song with a good production is the sort of joining point of the two things. So
it's interesting because the things you've described, like key elements of an artist, like, for example, if they've got a really interesting voice, or if they've got something else about them that makes them interesting, it's more like all of those things give the mood. Yeah,
and as you said, having a good sound doesn't necessarily mean, I mean, this is an argument that I face all the time, you don't have to be a great singer to have a good voice. And sometimes great singers don't necessarily have great voices. And then sometimes within a group, when a group blends, that can be just a magic thing. And sometimes it doesn't work. And, you see a band and you go, oh, I'm not sure that works. Even though they think it works, it doesn't. And then sometimes you can be incredibly lucky and you get random individuals whose voices blend really, really well. Of course, in the cases like the Beach Boys and the Bee Gees and those things,
they obviously...
I mean, that always makes a huge difference. But in the case of bands, when you do get a blend that works really, really well, sometimes they're just magical combinations, and so you can create something that's really good. And again, with musicianship, the technology that's available now allows a generation of people who may not necessarily be the most amazing musicians in the world, but they may have some great ideas, and I'm all for that. I think ideas are everything. Yeah. As we say, all the gear and no idea.
I remember working on because you produced my first album, and I remember working on that, and sometimes it would just be about finding kind of one sound or like one effect. I remember you've got your, is it a limb? The limb drum
limb
machine.
Drum.
Yeah. I remember we used to play around with that for ages and just like get this like cool mad little beat, and then it's just like so simple, those little things, and then they just spiral.
But also, if you remember, although I do tell the story to my students occasionally, I mean, the great thing of getting a vocal, and if you remember when we did some of those vocals and it was the very, very first thing that you spoke, to try and get that first sound of the wakening voice.
Really?
And do you remember the time where...
Do you remember the time where... I think I know what you're going to say.
Yeah. Well, so for the... this is a good example. Very expensive mics. When you turn them off, you put a shield on them to protect them from the damp overnight or the dust. And Natalie was staying with me, and we decided to do the record in the morning, very early on, before we had a coffee or breakfast. And this is when we were in London. And I put the fader up. And I thought, oh, God, it sounds terrible. Really doesn't sound very good. And of course, I'd forgotten that I put the screen on it, and Natalie had also started singing.
I'm
not
just
realised.
And then you completely inexperienced at this point, didn't even realise.
And then you said, "Oh, what's this thing on it?" And then as we pulled that off, suddenly the beautiful Natalie McCool vocal sound appeared. So yes, so I must remember to take them off.
I was like, oh, I don't even realise that there's a cover on that microphone, how inexperienced I was at that point. So,
but the principle of that sound is, so you mentioned earlier that I produced the Beach Boys, which I did. But before I produced the Beach Boys, I did many, many sessions with Bruce Johnson, who's a member of the Beach Boys.
Yeah.
And Bruce Johnson, when he lived in California, was very, very good friends with Captain and Tennille and very good friends with the Carpenters. And they actually did live literally next door to him. And he told me stories that when the Carpenters would go to the studio to do the vocal tracks, Karen would leave very, very early in the morning, before coffee, before breakfast, and sometimes she wouldn't even speak in the car, and the first moments she opened her voice was on mic. And I remember him telling me that story, and I thought, that's a great idea, because that croaky opening voice is actually, particularly when you're not having to sing out, is a really lovely sound. And you only get it for 15, 20 minutes, and then once your voice is open, it's gone.
Yeah.
And that was the thing that we tried to... And if I remember... Is it Black Sun? The first 4 lines of that first opening verse are the very first time. Yeah, the very first time that you mentioned anything, and I think we captured that. And I think that's really important with recording, is capturing a moment. We had it the other day on a track we were doing. So I've got some smaller guitar amps that I use when we just run the track through, just because they're very quick and easy. And I hadn't realised, but the jack plug, it's a semi-professional jack plug, and of course not designed for professional use, and it had actually broken. And I was listening to the sound as we were running the track through, and I thought, wow, that's a really interesting sound. It kind of sounds like T-Rex, like Ride a White Swan type of sound, really thin and wispy. Luckily, I recorded it, and then I went out to the studio and realised that the jack plug had broken. And of course, when I fixed it, the sound but luckily I got it. And I remember a long time ago, John Moss from Culture Club, the drummer in Culture Club, I remember we were doing an interview with Peter Powell, and we were all in the studio together. And Peter said to John, "What's the best thing about working with Steve?" And he said, "He always puts the machine into record." And that's a really, really important thing.
Forget.
Don't miss that moment, because that moment is sometimes irreplaceable. The lead vocal on "Do You Really Want to Hurt Me" is one take from top to finish. One take.
Wow. God, he's good, isn't he?
One of the well, you've sung with him. I mean, you see, there's another example of blend. When we did that performance in St George's Hall, the blend that you and Mary had.
That was really fun. That was just for anyone who doesn't know about that event, that was a Liverpool International Music event that you curated a few years back, and it was an amazing event, and it was called Assembly Point Sessions.
It was a selection of bands.
Culmination of bands. Bernard Butler, Boy George, Holly Cook, Level 42, me,
Charlatans,
the Charlatans, Mary Epworth,
but
many.
What great moments, yeah. But for me, a couple of the great moments were Tim Burgess singing with Boy George doing Satellite of Love.
Yeah.
But for me, what I mentioned about the blend is the sound of reggae backing vocals. Now, I'm very fortunate I have produced Ziggy Marley, and I went to Jamaica, and I've stood next to Rita Marley, and I've heard her voice. And it's a particular, we were talking about vocal tone. Well, you and Mary Epworth absolutely nailed those harmonies. So when Holly Cook did her lead vocal, and bearing in mind her record's got absolutely authentic,
loads on it.
It's got the
loads of backing vocals.
Yeah, you two nailed it. Absolutely nailed the sound. It sounded so good.
Oh, it was loads of fun. I love backing vocals. It's a different, as you say, with blend, it's completely a different skill. And when I first started doing them, and I was like, oh God, I'm really bad at this. So used to singing lead vocals, but then you just get used to stepping back. And the stepping back it's a very nice feeling. You're just settling in. You're
fortunate that you've got quite a wide range, which again means that you can do both the low harmonies and the high harmonies. And again, multi-tracking your voice is a particularly pleasant sound.
Yeah, well, you got to get it right.
Yeah,
every take, get the same rhythm and stuff. Talking about record production, so I know that recently you composed the score for Hyper Brawl Tournament, which is a video game.
Yeah, it's coming out very soon. It's on Apple Arcade currently, and then it's going to be on all of the other things at some point in October. It's literally ready to go.
Great.
But I'm really, really pleased with the way the soundtrack is doing. Now, you just mentioned earlier about the Lindrum. So when I got the gig to do that, so you and I love Drive, the film Drive, and we love the soundtrack to that. And the game is set in this sort of this kind of 80s dystopian world. And when I was first commissioned to do the game, which is quite a while ago now, one of the first few ideas that the game's developer wanted was again, thinking of sound, not song or melody or any instruments, but just the sound of certain things. They said to me, I really like the sound of that, or I really like the sound of that. What is that? And on one particular thing, it was the classic Lindrum sound.
Yes.
And I said, well, to my ear, that sounds to me like a Lindrum. Let me knock you up a demo. And I knocked up a demo and I used my Lindrum on it. And when they heard the demo, they went, oh my God, it's perfect, you got the gig. Because they then knew that I understood what sounds make certain things. And I think with a game, it's really, really, really important.
Yeah.
And although I've never done a game before, I've done film scores. And I mean, there's things that are the same and things that are different. I think the main difference on a game is that you don't know how long anyone's going to be on a particular section. So the music has to be able to transition from section A, B, C in a way that is enjoyable to the listener. So that's a technical achievement rather than even a musical thing. But it is definitely a sonic achievement because you've got to have things that make the end of a section rise or feel like it's going into another bit, but not be disappointing when the next section comes in, and then what we've ended up doing, which I'm so excited about, is we've done a soundtrack version because it's very trendy at the moment for games to have what's called the original soundtrack. So I've extended everything, done 12-inch mixes, and so that's coming out as well. So I'm really excited about that.
Wow. Because I suppose creating a record or producing a record and then creating a score for like a film, TV or video game, I guess that the end product is basically the same because you are effectively creating a piece of music, but the process is different. Like, how is that different? Like, you touched on it there, but just interested in how you would even begin to approach that.
Well, with film and television, I think, so with the television stuff, the turnaround is really fast. So what you tend to do with television, particularly episodic television, is that they tend to have half a dozen directors on different episodes. So you'll meet with director one, and then he'll go, or she will say, okay, here's what we've got. Sometimes you'll go to the set because they need it so far ahead they haven't even shot anything. For example, when I did She-Wolf of London, I would go to the set with director X while director Y was on set filming another episode just to get a sense of how it is. And then you get a rough cut and then you'll sit down with the producer of the film and the producer will say, okay, I hear this here, I hear something here, I hear something here. What do you think? Or there's a particularly important scene coming here. We really need this, this and this. So you kind of have a wish list of what works, and then you've got to think of ideas. Now, with episodic television, generally you have a bunch of tunes that fit different characters, so it's a way of rearranging those. Is it like motifs? Yeah. So that are attached. And obviously you might have a goody baddie, or da da da, all that kind of stuff. But with a movie, it's really, really interesting. I think one of the things that was most interesting when I did Mr. Frost with Jeff Goldblum is, I'll never forget this. They said, can you come to the set? And they were filming it in Paris. And it was an old chateau that no one lived in, but because it was quite a scary film. Essentially, Jeff Goldblum plays a character that's supposedly the devil and kills people and has no empathy with him. So we go on the set and the director says, Steve, I'd like to introduce you to Jeff Goldblum. And he goes, hey, wow. So he goes, so you're doing the music, are you? And I said, yes. Now, at this point, I had no idea. Did he want to be on it? No, but I had no idea that Jeff Goldblum was the pianist that he is. Yeah. So he said to me, so what ideas have you got? And I said, well, Philip, the director, is very, very keen on, he was very keen on the Coen brothers and how they have sort of quite low piano things. And there was a broken piano in the chateau. And I said, well, I'm working on this thing. And I played like a little thing on the piano. Now, I'm not a great keyboard player. I can get by, but and I just played a bit in front of him. And then Jeff sat down and played. He said, oh, you mean something like this? And played it like.
Oh, wow.
And I went, maybe you should do the score, because obviously we now all know he is.
Just play it.
He is such an amazing pianist, and this is a broken piano, by the way, and he made it sound incredible. But what happened was, I did the score.
Were you pressing record?
Yeah.
Did you have record on?
So I get back to London, I start doing the score, and it's really good. And we end up with they finish the film, and they end up with a scene that doesn't quite work visually. So they come up with an idea. They say, Steve, so the film had Alan Bates in it, another really famous actor. They said, could Alan come to your studio and just do some kind of conversation as if he's on the phone and maybe an answer machine? Because they needed to not have him on shot, but they needed some audio to bridge a scene which didn't quite work. So Alan Bates came to my studio to record just like as if he was having a conversation with somebody on a phone and an answer machine. So Philip, the director, came to think. He said, well, what are you working on at the moment? I said, well, I've got this scene, and I'd spent literally ages on this scene, and it was in those days it was also on tape, so I had like 48 faders with things on. So he said, well, let me have a look. So I ran the video and I started pushing the faders up. Now, my desk in those days was quite long, so I pushed like 4 faders up, and he went, oh, I love it. It's so good. And I was like looking to my right,
no.
and there's like
the rest.
But I didn't even bother to push the other faders up because he said, I love it. But there was like literally 40 more channels of things. And he said, no, I just love that. So back to your first thing with film, unlike records, sometimes less is more.
Yeah.
You know, there's one scene in one of my television things I did. It's one note, one single note, but it is a great sound, and it just kind of goes. But the moment the scene comes, you don't need any more. And then with the game, same thing. There's certain parts of the game where there's very minimal things. It's just like maybe a drum beat with some weird percussion, and then suddenly I'll bring in like a pulse bass or something, and then it builds to kind of a million tracks. But that's the big difference between game, television and film versus a record. Because with a record, if it's a record with a vocal, you've got to still tell that story, and you're going to build and build and build. With a film, you know, you've got the dialogue, you've got a lot of visual things that often, you know, make up for quite a lot of it. So you're really enhancing. But when the music is terrible, it does ruin a film.
Yeah. I suppose it's multi-sensory, isn't it? Because when you've got a record, it's just one thing. So it does have to be like a 3D experience with this one thing.
But it's also, what I like that's really good, though, is when I did one episode of the TV series, I sent the stuff in, and the producer phoned me and he said, Steve, I hate all of it.
Oh, no.
He said, it was one episode.
Well, at least he's honest.
And I was going so well up until that point. He said, but I'll tell you why I hate it. He said, you've looked at the character. He said, you just made it far too scary.
Right.
He said, I want it to be really sensual.
Right.
And I said, okay. So I kind of worked through the night, which I very rarely do, but I worked through the night and I kind of delivered him something else. But what was so great is that when I looked at it back, he was absolutely right. But because of the way that I did the music, the sound design people within the dubbing had really enhanced what I had given them. And this is where creative directors are so valuable. So you give them the music, and yet they take it to another level by doing weird things to it. So, for example, there was a drum machine starting the scene, and I'd left it quite dry. But what they did was they lined it up, not in the place where I'd started the music, but they'd extended the front so that when the character opened the front door, they switched the light switch, and the first beat was on the light switch, and they put tons of echo on it. And the reason I was mentioning that is because, you know, you and I have just done this trailer for Sky, and one of the things I have to say is whoever mixed that has done such an incredible job.
Yeah.
Because I gave them stems, which is, you know, for those that don't know, the stems are the breakdowns of the track. So rather than a stereo mix of everything, they had a few separate things, including your voice separate, which also, there's one scene where you see Jude Law's face, and they've just added like so much reverb to your voice so that it extends into his dialogue. That's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic.
So the trailer you're talking about, that's a track we did called Wondrous Place, and it's a cover of a Billy Fury song for anyone who doesn't know. And yes, Sky picked it up for a new series that's out now on Now TV, and it's called The Third Day. It's featuring Jude Law, Paddy Considine, Naomi Harris, and loads of other people. Actually, it was really good. Check it out if you get a minute. But yeah, so the track that you produced is on the trailer, and I thought the trailer was really interesting because because of the way they use the stems, but because of the way they use the breath as like a rhythmic thing. I thought they did a really good job. I thought it was really...
No, I completely agree.
Really suited it.
And that's the thing that I really, really love about that. And again, one of the great things that's happening with the game is the game engine. So when you have it on Xbox and all those things, you supply the game as stems so that the sound engineers, so when you're playing a game and you're listening on headphones, things are moving all around the place, and that means that as technology moves forward and more individual channels can be stored on a device, the enjoyment that you get is even greater. But I thought they did such a great job. And it's interesting because it's the same team that produced that Sky program that did the Chernobyl, which I thought was unbelievably brilliant.
Yeah, it was brilliant.
And I can kind of see why they liked our track so much, because if anyone hasn't seen Chernobyl, please watch it, but particularly the score. The score is incredible because the composer, what she did was, Hilda, her name is, she took the sound of turbines. It's set obviously at Chernobyl, but those turbines make a particular noise, and she took the sound of turbines, metal, and sampled them and used that with cello and weird guitar sounds, the kind of guitar sounds that we had used, those sustaining, looping, weird, freezing guitar sounds. Boss
DD7, my delay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Those sorts of things are really creative, and the Chernobyl soundtrack is fantastic, but actually marries to your tone really, really well. So I can see why they chose it.
Yeah.
It's interesting because the program itself doesn't actually have music like that in it, which is kind of odd. But
yeah, I watched the first episode last night. It's very strange. You know what I was going to say? It's so weird that it's almost like Wicker Man-esque, isn't it? The kind of feel of the series.
Yes, it's Wicker Man meets Don't Look Back.
But with Wicker Man, I remember when we were working in when you were based in London, and I was staying in Parsons Green round the corner. And what did I watch before we did our sessions? I watched Wicker Man. How weird is that?
Which is such a great film.
I'd never seen it, and I was just like, I have to watch. I was like, up at 8 a.m, like watching like half an hour before I went. I wanted to talk about Wondrous Place a bit more. Just one more question. What were your thoughts? Because the first time I played that, it was a live thing that I did for Threshold Festival, because Billy Fiore Foundation had funded me for equipment while I was at LIPA to buy music equipment. So that's the whole kind of thing that I picked his song to play at this event. It was a Paul Denoyer panel about his book, Liverpool Wondrous Place, and the song is listed at the back of the book. But then I wanted to record it. I remember sending you the demo. So what were your thoughts when you heard the demo?
Well, number one, like many producers, Billy Fury was one of the most incredible artists. That first record he was one of the very first artists to be allowed to pretty much do his own thing. So if you've never checked it out, it's the one with the silver jacket. That album is, and you look at the timeline of when that album came out, this is before the Beatles. This is such an incredible album. And so I was a big, big fan growing up. I mean, I was only very young, but I really, really loved those records. And I was very familiar with the original because of Fairgrounds. So I have these real memories of going to Hampstead Fair and hearing, "Oh, the Wondrous Place," and also shaking all over and Bebopalula. Those three.
Oh, I love Bebopalula.
But those three songs are like burnt in my retina from when I was like maybe 5 or something like that. So
you must have been thinking, what has she done to this amazing song? It sounds sinister and horrible.
No, not at all. Because of course, as we had already proven with Nightcall. Taking a song and literally reversing it is a brilliant thing to do, just completely. And I think it transpired. It was also exactly the same time that we were both getting these weird pedals. So it was like a meeting of a brilliant moment. And I think that it was a great choice because it is a bit of an obscure song. And it's one of those songs of Billy Fury's catalogue that doesn't really get played that much. You know, some of the other records get played.
I find that so strange because it's a great song. Yeah.
But I, you know, for those that don't know his back catalogue, you know, listen to, you know, the back catalogue. It's unbelievably clever. And bearing in mind, this is at the same time as Joe Meek. They didn't have multi-track recording as we have it today.
Yeah.
So yes, so I was very familiar with it, and I'm extremely thrilled that Sky has given us a kind of shop window, because I think it was such a great track. It was kind of one of the last things we did together, and I think it's so great.
It's
that
a real one-off thing, wasn't it? Yeah. And because in fact it transitioned me coming up here, because we did some of the vocals here. Yeah,
we did some of the track in London and we finished it off here, and I think it was the very, very first mix that I did in the studio.
I remember that. Yeah, for me that song, what I liked most about it, which I wanted to bring out in the version, was the lyrics, I think, are so creepy and very like obsessive in a way.
No, and that's obviously what the producers of Third Day have found. It resonates with them in a way that
no, it's so interesting. I just want to go back to what you were saying about doing the video game, and someone who is not necessarily a musician but has still an artistic vision about the show or the game. It's just interesting hearing different people's opinions. Like, you know, it's too sinister, I want it more sensual. Like, it's so interesting that they would respond like that, and they're not a musician. They don't really know how to communicate it other than that. I think that's so interesting, like working with different people in different mediums and how they communicate, and it all comes together.
But I think you mentioned this earlier, that I think we're all drawn to certain aspects of a song or a sound that does affect us in a certain way, and that's everyone. All of us are an audience.
Yeah.
The difference between professionals that do it for a living is that we hopefully understand some of the ingredients that go into making that, and so maybe we can do it more regularly, and it isn't just complete luck every time. Yeah. I mean, you know, if you did it every day, of course, but you know, you don't get it right every time, but you get it consistently more right than wrong.
Yes. I'm just aware that we've got a few gearheads watching this. I've just seen people joining, so I will ask. This is one of my questions. It's a fun question. What is your favourite piece of gear and why?
I think it depends on the session, but I think, as often I say to students, having a good microphone is really important, because a good microphone, you can capture the thing, and often that is the first element of sound, isn't it? The microphone captures the very, very first thing. So in terms of home recording and everything, just get the best microphone that you possibly can afford, and there's some great choices out there, because that will enable you to capture things in a great. It's like having a great camera. You know, everyone takes pictures in their phone, but when you see one on a proper camera, it looks a lot better. So I think microphones are really important always. But I think with gear, it varies from month to month. But at the moment, there's so many great strides forward in some of the software. Although that's not necessarily a physical thing, it really is a tool that you can use.
Yeah, I'd say that's still gear. Like a plug-in, but I think, you know...
Yeah, but guitar pedals, synthesizers, you know, you get a great synth sound. You know, you can... You know, if I go over here and you sit, you know, fiddling with something on here... You know,
oh, wow.
You suddenly... No, but the point is, you know, like you can get a really great guitar tone that you love, you can get... You know, hours and hours disappear while you just get a sound.
Yeah.
And it can be something that really touches your soul. And then you can write a song on it. I've written several songs which I've done with Stephen Langstuff, where I've had just a sound or a thing, you know, like a bit. And I said to him, I love this bit. Is it a bit? And he went, oh yeah. It's a let's, and then he'll kind of come up with a little guitar motif or something. But we start with something that can be really, really very small.
That's so cool. Yeah, gear is important. If finding one thing that just cracks it open.
But I can't say one specific thing. It's lots of different things, and it depends on the mood of what I'm doing.
Yeah, too much pressure. No, it's good. Yeah. Another fun question. What was it like winning a Grammy?
Well, it was an odd one because I didn't know that I'd won it. Because I didn't go to the show. That's why I don't have the statue. I've got the certificate because I got a call from the Grammy people and they said, we're just checking your address to send the Grammy. And I went, what?
Yeah.
And they said, yeah. So it was for Denise Williams and the album was Water Under the Bridge. So it was one of those odd things. It was a strange time. I didn't know until afterwards, and in those days it wasn't televised in the UK like it is now, so I just didn't know until they phoned me. So I have it, you've seen it on my wall. I have the thing on my wall, but I don't actually have the statue, whereas I do have my Brit Award. But what's really weird is that the year that I won my Brit Award, because CD was a new thing, it's a CD in a plastic thing. It's not the statue. They changed it for 1 year. So I don't have the statue.
You should write to them.
Yeah. But I think the most recent awards, which is only last year, the radio ones, I love those awards because they look like old radio mics. So I love those.
Oh, nice.
A Grammy is great to have, and I've won one Grammy for me personally, but many of the bands I've worked with have won Grammys for because the way that Grammys work is, the band can win a load of Grammys, but not necessarily the producer. But that particular one was for me. But Culture Club have had them, and many bands have had them that I've worked with. So it's great to have it. I think the Brit Award is fun because the Brit Award was presented to me by Sir George Martin, which was fantastic. So, and as you know, he was one of my heroes. So to be presented with my Brit Award by Sir George Martin was lovely.
Awesome. What have you got coming up that's exciting?
Well, we're currently recording the Hush Tones album, so that's going really, really well. We've done all the backing tracks and most of the guitars. We're just in the last throes of the next stage. So that's what I'm currently recording. We've done a covers EP, which is going to come out soon. And there's a couple of crackers on it, really just as a stopgap, because as I mentioned, we did lockdown rehearsals. So we kind of worked out some ideas and thought, why don't we just do a couple of covers and then we can put that out, which we'll put out in a couple of weeks' time, and then we'll be ready with the album. But the album's sounding absolutely fantastic, so I'm very excited by that. The trailer launches in a few days. I just did a trailer a couple of days ago for that, so like a new piece of music for the trailer, which is very exciting. I think people of your age will love the trailer. I'm not giving anything away.
I'm going to check it out. That's Hyperbrawl Tournament, isn't it?
Yes, but there's a trailer for it, and the graphics are so amazing.
Cool.
So that goes live in I can't remember exactly, in a few, soon, very soon.
Okay.
So, and then continuing on with everything, just trying to keep busy. I mean, for me, I find a very good sense of well-being by coming to the studio. After all, the studio for me is my most creative environment. I'm most relaxed in a studio. I've spent my entire life in recording studios. I know nothing else. So for me, they're very, very inspirational. They're not intimidating. And I find it very creative, and I think it's really, really good for your well-being. If I come away one day and I haven't actually really written anything or done anything, but I've got a great bass sample or whatever, that's a good day. I can enjoy that.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, it's important to just fiddle around and potter around, and you're still having fun.
Hopefully you're writing lots of new tunes.
I have been, yeah. I've got pulled together a few bits and bobs. It's a range, really. Of my own stuff and then other people's stuff and different projects, but it's all been really good. It's a weird time, but hopefully I can do something with what I've written.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Steve, and have a great evening, and see you soon.
All right, bye then.
Bye. Thanks so much for listening, and don't forget to subscribe and follow to this podcast. I'm Natalie McCool, and you can find me and my music on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and also on my website, nataliemccool.co.uk. Thanks!